This book, then, is a story of the birth of Simcha's daughter, of the births of other daughters, of the piercing of women. It is a story of women who are born in or arrive in the land, of women who are ceremonious and correct with each other, who celebrate sermons and birthrights and death rights and sacrificial rites, exodus and exorcism rites. It is the story of sanity and madness in the house of women.
Each spring during Passover, Jews sit down for a ritual meal called a Seder. The text is the Haggadah, which tells of the exodus of the ancient Israelites from Egypt. It is written in the Bible, "Tell your sons of the liberation from slavery in Egypt as if it were happening to you." The Seder, like all Jewish rituals, is led by the man of the house.
Synagogues were not our home. Everything, the prayers, the language, the customs, everything excluded us, whether subtly or not so subtly, depending on which form of Judaism, but we were excluded. It wasn't our own.
By the mid-1970s, change was in the air. Women were marching in the streets demanding equality. Jewish women started to take their place within traditional rituals. At the same time, another group of Jewish women, led by Esther Broner, held the first feminist Seder. It brought a women's perspective to an ancient story of oppression, freedom, and liberation. These women were grasping the tradition aggressively, personalizing the ritual and making it their own. Who was this woman who stood up to thousands of years of Jewish tradition to create a feminist Seder? What chutzpah!
Much better. Okay, 1, 2, up. You're covering.
In the traditional Seder, there is no place for the spontaneity. One person at the head reads it rapidly in a language no one understands, and then it's finished. When women do it, it's so thoughtful, it's so holy, it's so far-reaching, and it's so connected and touching that all of us leave, I think, enlarged.
I feel that my role in life is to record, and I am recording this Seder. That was me in 1984. Now I am telling the story of Esther Broner and the Weave of Women. I was sitting next to Esther, who led the Seder. Look at us. We were all so young and beautiful then. The first Women's Seder was held in 1976. I became a Seder sister in its second year. Then Esther named 3 accomplished Seder mothers. Bella Abzug served in the U.S. House of Representatives. Grace Paley was a distinguished author and activist. And Gloria Steinem was known by everyone as the modern face of feminism.
Seder means order, the order of doing things. And the traditional Seder begins with a song, like the table of contents. But women always begin before the traditional order. The traditional order begins when men sit down at the meal. Women begin with cleaning the house. Women begin with cutting up the vegetables. So women have a very different order. I will ask you during this time to think of what it is what are the crumbs, what is the bitterness, what is it that you want to get rid of this past year in your lives?
Personally, I'd like to burn the thing in me that makes me not be able to live in the present, but always look to the future.
I would like to burn my fearfulness and the fearfulness of all women.
I would like to burn the products of the patriarchal system that continues to oppress women and minorities, much as the Pharaoh did the Jews. And what do I want to burn inside of me?
There I am in the spring of 1994. I'm sitting with an illustrious group of women, and she asks the opening question. What chametz do you want to rid yourself of this year? I talked about how very much I wanted to be able to put stuff in perspective and be able to go on, and started weeping powerfully. And then all of a sudden I felt this hand on my back and being comforted. And I looked around, and there sitting next to me was Gloria Steinem, who didn't know me. And to me that was emblematic of what the Seders represented, about women supporting women. We were all Jewish feminists. The question that Esther posed for us was, do we find a place for ourselves within the Jewish tradition or remain outside?
We have a choice. If we're going to be secular, profane, we're going to be religious. But do we want into the mythic structure, into the theological structure, or do we want to be sent out of the tent like Miriam?
That moment of, am I gonna change this or am I gonna leave, I think is a really important moment for women and anybody who feels themselves up against a tradition that often does not seem to want them involved. I understand the desire to throw the book against the wall. I understand the desire to say these tents are not mine.
Then I read the feminist Haggadah by Naomi Nimrod and Esther Broner. I was thrilled. Here was the Seder completely transformed. Every tradition, every custom, every practice turned inside out and made loving and whole with women at its heart.
In 1975, I was pregnant with my daughter Ruth, and Esther was here in Israel. Esther had this wonderful idea to have a revolutionary Seder, that she'll invite all her friends, but will change the order of things. All the men who were invited were preparing the food, and all the women were studying the texts that we are going to talk about on that night, sitting, reclining, and telling the story. The Seder was wonderful. The food that the men prepared was okay, but we were mainly excited by the texts. Esther and I, after the Seder, were so excited, liking each other's texts, that we decided we must get together, search and research, and learn the history. We wanted to find out more about Miriam, about all the women who went down to Egypt. We read the Yerushalmi and the Bavli. We read the Bible there and back. My father just died, and we used his library. And my mother gave us drink and food, asking us, Esther, Naomi, what are you doing? What are you writing? The Haggadah is already written. What are you trying to find in all these big old books? And when we realized that my mother, who was used to the conventional Seder, slowly was approaching us and wanting to take part with us, looking for pictures, looking for the women who took part in the first Exodus, then we knew we are onto something real that will interest other people, other women, not only us. It's not only our crazy idea, but people will understand. The women will understand.
Out of the mouth of the spider comes a thread, a hair's breadth, that captures dew, lassos life, fabricates until the woven and the weaver are one.
Those of us who gathered for the first feminist Seder, we understood that the equality we were fighting for in society had to extend to traditions of Judaism.
When we walked through the desert, by and large, we left no footprints. So it's time to go back again and find something out about the original Exodus, which didn't mention women.
It says in Exodus is, you strike this and this and this, and you go inside and you stay till it's over. And we declare this a safe and sacred place. No oppressor will get you.
What Esther and the rest of us who were the creators of the Seder contributed was a perspective of an educated Jewish woman. We all had sat in shul for hours and hours throughout our childhood. We knew what we were starting with. We had the clay. We reshaped it. I think put together secular feminism and our Jewish traditional education, we were the right people at the right moment in time.
It wasn't just a potluck of women getting together and doing the rituals that men usually do. It was transformative because it was freshly created literary Jewish practice.
Asher kidishanu b'mitzvato v'tzivanu lehadlik ner lehadlik ner shel
I think at the first Seder, we all knew we were participating in something really special, and at that point, it seemed like rebellion. I mean, because clearly we were doing what we weren't supposed to be doing. I had never been to a Seder before in my life. I had no idea that it was going to become such a huge tradition.
The Seder felt like the community I had always wished for. Each year we would choose a different theme, but our topics were often political. We were all activists and knew that the political is personal. We brought into our Seder stories of heroic women. Esther invited women from the new crop of rabbis and cantors coming out of the seminaries. We welcomed our daughters, the new generation.
People were struck by Esther's poetry and her magical vision and took it into themselves and made it their own. It was the first time, really, that we had a way of owning Jewish practice.
We map our bodies. We're making new trails and new tracings. There have been very few tracings of ourselves. Tombstones are often blank where wives are on them. They often don't have names. I feel now that I have to put names on those who died as well as those living.
We spoke of our mothers and of our stolen legacy.
In Jewish tradition, male lineage dominates your identity. You are the son of the son of the son. In the feminist Seder, we introduced another kind of consciousness.
She was the one who came up with naming ourselves by our matrilineage. And I have seen this in Jewish group after Jewish group when women are together and they say, I am
Susan Bat Opal Bat Re Bat Ida.
My grandmother, whose name was Rose Naaman, when she was in her 50s, after being depressed for many years and being unable to cope with the prisons of her life, she killed herself. And this might have prevented that.
To bring, again, into the presence, into the room, into my consciousness, women who only served and cooked and stayed in the kitchen. Those women, I want to name them, and I know all of us get choked up when we name our matrilineage.
Allison bat Henrietta, bat Hilda, and that's what I got.
The Feminist Seder is an amazing forum to be able to encourage women to relate to Judaism in ways that work for them. The more that women can be encouraged to come into the tent, the better.
We always have, as part of our theme, a sort of a midrashic go-around, where everyone at the table, or in our case, on the floor, contributes something to a theme that we all have met in advance to determine, even electoral politics. So there's always a degree of consciousness about the world outside of the Seder table.
If we had succeeded, there would be no poverty in America, but there's terrible poverty, and we are not marching on Washington.
It gave everybody a chance to speak and everybody a chance to listen, which is crucial.
This notion of being in the desert for 40 years, that the generation born in slavery needed to die off because of the consciousness that they were raised with, that they were not prepared to accept freedom.
Hope and despair are things that I know well. This is my first Seder in freedom in 20 years, and I feel overwhelmed at the beauty and joy of it. And part of the hope has been always for me that one day I would come to this Seder.
This Seder for me was where I found my political voice as a Jewish woman. By listening and learning from everybody that shared the table, it empowered me to speak my voice.
And to know from such a young age that it is okay to articulate my opinion and to be careful about that and think about that and use my voice.
The first voice I heard was in Yiddish, and I understand that my grandmother had to make the mailman a heroic character, had to make the shopkeeper somebody saintly, because she had to add legend to an unbearable past. And I began to understand that fiction is just fact with magic added to it.
She was first generation to Russian-born parents, raised in Detroit, Michigan. She met my father in college. The way she tells it, my mother started college just before her 16th birthday, finishing early, and she saw this very handsome man who was older and indeed a grad student at a coffee shop. And so she sat and drank sodas and almost flunked out of her first semester watching this very handsome man. They slowly became acquaintances. He did not date her because she was considered too young. And over time, they were both at Wayne State University, my father in the art department, my mother in the English department. And over time, they got to know each other. And so they dated and very quickly became engaged and were married. They came to New York actually pre-having the kids. Their first years in New York were as artists and activists, her really moving towards realizing she was going to be a writer and developing that, and my father beginning to continue his skills and beginning to have his shows in New York and move the career forward. A few years in, my mother got pregnant with my sister. She had her first, and 13 months later had twins, or as my mother told my father as he collapsed crossing the street, she went like this. And he said, "Victory?" And she said, "2 for twins," which became the name of one of the books that they collaborated on.
M. Broner, as she is best known, is a novelist, playwright, ritualist, and a leading feminist writer. She's the author of many books, including The Women's Haggadah, Weave of Women, The Telling, the story of a group of Jewish women who journey to spirituality through community and ceremony. Her latest work is the novel The Red Squad.
There were black brothers, and they all spoke of fires, heat taps thrown into the camp garbage to burn looting children, women and children running from burning villages, bodies blown away with C4, anywhere in Vietnam, a free fire zone, setting a dead boy up against a tree, putting a cigarette in his mouth, a hat on his head. What we do to men, we do twice to women.
She was always such an activist and so much about fairness and community and really wanting to change things in the world. That idea of fairness and activism and shock at the treatment of people, whether it was women or African Americans or Jews. Before children, they were in Alabama for about a year. She was stunned at segregation. It never occurred to her. She was very active in the civil rights movement and on many of the marches. They were going to fire my father because she had an African American come in through the front door. So what she did is she blocked off the door. Now this is a 19-year-old. She broke the front door so that everybody had to enter the back door of the house.
In the 1960s, a movement to protest the war in Vietnam was sweeping the country.
Our students really began the anti-war movement. My husband and I both taught at the university. It was a time of great democracy in their teaching, since we're learning from the students, and their activism inspired us. One didn't think of danger so much. And that was a time of great excitement, great energy, which I hope we bring into the future.
Then the women's movement exploded.
There were cover stories, Life magazine, Newsweek, Time magazine, Esquire, all on women are revolting. You know, the double meaning of women are revolting.
Confronting the issues facing women was a natural progression for Esther's activist spirit.
I sent students on the Jane route in Chicago for necessary abortions. It was so much more dangerous for these young girls to have these babies when they had no jobs and no money and no resources.
Esther's passion for justice never diminished. In fact, it once got in the way of picking up her dear granddaughter Alexandra from school, or as she used to refer to her, Alexandra the Great.
I want to say that it was after the Amadou Diallo shooting. I'm sitting inside Heschel, and it's like after 6 o'clock, and everyone has left, and Grandma's still not there. Grandma had been arrested protesting. A whole group of older Jewish women were arrested. They were all put in the van to be taken to the precinct. Some of them had arthritis and the cuffs were hurting. One had really low blood sugar and she needed a donut, so they had to go to Dunkin' Donuts, and then they got them all coffee, and it was just an amazing story that no matter how old you are, you act and you fight for what you think is right.
I now understand that Esther had a dialogue with history.
We have to march in front of places. I don't want to be invisible anymore. I don't even want to be somewhat visible. I think I want to be heard. I want my voice very loud, and I want us to figure out what we can do for that to happen.
I mean, if you had thoughts of where we would be by now, of what that women's movement that you helped to begin would bring us, how is the current moment shaping up?
I was sure we'd have socialism, at the least. Even now, I'm wondering what they're waiting for. I never thought the rich would get richer and the poor poorer. That's not what we were studying for.
Ritual is the exhaled breath, weaving with thread,
marking a space of our own.
I insist that we are an important part of ritual. Women are not considered as important a part as I would like them to be. I think that we are the leaders. I think since we are in the home and holidays like Pesach take place in the home, it is up to us to conduct the Seder. We'll list the plagues together, and when we say it in English, for each plague, we dip our finger into our cup and touch our finger to our plates. Dom, Sokadeya, Kinim, Aro,
From the very beginning of the Feminist Seder, we have taken the givens of the Haggadah, the absolute staples, the 4 questions, and the plagues. We always interpreted the plagues as the oppression of women, the hardships, the adversity, the struggles of women. We used to call them out and list them on an oak tag and put them on the wall. Starting with Gina, each person to read a plague.
Dam, blood. Women see blood in the water every 28 days or so, and until we're ready to procreate, we actually welcome it. But when we face an unplanned pregnancy as the result of a mistake or a failed contraceptive, we must be able to consult with our conscience, our partner, our doctor, or our rabbi about whether to continue. The choice must be ours.
Dever, cattle disease. This affliction strikes girls at young ages. It comes from being herded like cattle into a one-size-fits-all beauty ideal that totally distorts women's perception of a healthy female body image. It's the plague of self-loathing.
Vermin. They're the men and sometimes women who try to keep us submissive and subjugated. They're the right-wing religious fanatics who would roll back the political and economic advances we've fought for these past 40 years.
Look at this panel. I don't see one single woman. Where are the women?
Our tent expanded, and the Seder became so popular that we had to choose whom to invite. Well, this led to tensions among the Seder sisters. Esther wanted to invite notables, and some of us wanted to invite friends and relatives.
Well, I remember the drastic year when the Seder's mothers and the Seder sisters fell into a bitter dispute over how big the Seder group should be and who should be invited. It was an annual battle, but this year was cataclysmic. We're protagonists and antagonists, and people were driven mad by Esther's refusal to be combative. Esther would not fight. This was a great weakness of hers. People stomped off, unsatisfied, and some never returned to the Feminist Seder. We had lost some of the original radical impulse.
Petty squabbles interfered with our high-minded purpose. I had hoped that women could be different. After all, if we, the peacemakers, couldn't work out our conflicts, who could? Nevertheless, Esther kept the rest of the core sisterhood together. She believed so passionately in her most notable creation. When the Women's Haggadah was published in Ms. Magazine in 1977, it inspired women everywhere to make their own seders. In order to include larger numbers, some women held mass seders, like the popular Mayan Seder.
With her weaving of women, you were drawn together in a way you could call a community, because without her, it doesn't really exist.
The reason Esther was so effective in changing Jewish women's minds was because she took Judaism so seriously. It was not a trivial matter for her to change the language of prayers or to rethink the meaning of biblical stories. She did it with the most profound respect and seriousness. And for that reason, I think, she was able to reach Orthodox women who scorned the rest of us frivolous interveners. Esther, the poet, rewrote that Haggadah deeply and seriously and poetically and turned it into wonderful language that transfixed us all as we participated in it. That's a literary creation. The power is in literature.
Women's literature, by and large, addresses itself to that which is daily, to that which comes from the home and outward. Men's literature very often deals with the war out there. If women's literature, like Morante, deals with the war, it deals with the civilians in history, for instance. So that it's familial, it's ordinary, and it's the ordinary becoming heroic that women's literature is about. It's about conquering the daily, not going out and conquering territory.
Esther brought a unique poetic style to the liturgy of the Seder. That same magical storytelling could be heard in all her literary output.
The women gather for the ceremony. They giggle nervously. What should it be called? Hymenectomy. No, that sounds like an appendectomy. It sounds like you're getting rid of your Uncle Hymen.
I laughed at a lot of it. It opened my eyes to a lot of things. I bristled at some of it. She was a little too caustic in some parts of it. But on the whole, I think I started to fall in love with Esther Broner when I read A Weave of Women.
Cut it, says Terry, against all vestigial structures, political and physical. Gerda is swift, the hymenal membrane is pierced. The baby starts and wails. There's a loud sigh from the group. Tova, the actress, says, now you are one of us. Terry, the godmother, says, may all orifices be opened. Dahlia, the singer, says, may she not be delivered intact to her bridegroom or judged by her hymen. Dee Dee, the Irish girl from America, says, may she never suffer again from piercing of the body or of the heart.
I would be able to identify a passage of Esther's completely out of context, which is, to me, the mark of, or certainly one of the indications of a really authentic voice.
My accordion pleated navel, I hate. My navel, accordion pleated because of Lena. Stretch marks on the sides of my hips, one on each hip, like white stripes down uniforms. I hate those. Those are from Lena. Do you hate Lena? Oh no, that's not allowed.
Her voice is in every line. It's quirky. She's got different rhythms than most people. There's a kind of a whisper, the same sort of whisper that was in her voice, in her fiction, almost as if she's letting you in on a secret.
Hair, all that hair, I hate. Hair on upper lip, faintly there. Long stiff hairs on chin, wild hair on my head. Hate my pube hair, bushy, curly forest, primeval forest. People look at the top of my head and know what's down below.
A Grace Paley sentence, you know a Grace Paley sentence. A Joan Didion sentence, you know a Joan Didion sentence. I feel like with Esther, not so much the sentences, but the larger pieces. If I just picked one up on a piece of paper that was blowing down the street, I think I would read it and say, this is Esther, this must be Esther.
What color do you associate with Esther?
Orange.
Purple.
Red.
Purple.
She dressed very distinctively, as though life were too short to waste it on drabness.
Esther made up, rituals that did indeed have universals in them, but each one was really created for the occasion and for the person. I always told her she should have a business, Rituals to Go.
That we will bless this room, for we're all together at this time, at this place, and in this season.
She was an extraordinary creator of new ritual that saw into the heart of a matter.
Well, I'm not sure that Esther went much of any place without a wand or a miracle. So
I first met Esther Broner at Gloria Steinem's house at a dinner that Gloria had called in a break in her work. So she invited me and Esther Broner and Marilyn French to dinner.
And we sat down at, I don't know, 7:30 or something like that, and we got up at 3 a.m.
And we then formed what we called, from that point on, our coven, and met 4 times a year, at least, for the next 20 years. And the purpose of all of that getting together was to evaluate our lives, to get feedback on what we were doing right or wrong, and then for Esther to lead us in chanting.
So we would repeat it, and shake wands over her head and so on, and laugh and carry on in order to cast a spell.
Once I thought, I can't remember who, somebody was in trouble, and I thought any minute she's gonna kill a chicken and pour her blood into a glass and run it around with a feather and say, drink it. And, I mean, it was like voodoo. How much different was it than the witches?
Some of what we'll do is bless the baby. First, we will encapsulate her in sage. Nachas. Pleasure from the baby.
I think Gloria and Carol Jenkins, they speak tenderly and with affection about being witches together. In other words, it was a consciousness-raising group.
May your mothers be your models and your grandmother your icon.
Made people happy.
With her feathers and her sparkles and her wands. And there was always some way that Esther had of making the ordinary special.
I think we are present at birth. It is up to us to have the words of birth. We are the ones who usually prepare the body for death, not the undertakers. It is up to us to say the words of death. I think we must not give our words away.
It was not the ritual making part of her. It wasn't the spiritualism that I cared about, but it was the genuineness. It was her genuineness. I was working on a book, and I was having a terrible time with it. I didn't know what to do with it. So I was sitting there for 6 months and not knowing what the hell to do. She said to me, come to me on Sunday and bring 2 pages. I don't want to discuss it. And unbelievably, it made me write 2 pages. And I went to her on Sunday with with whatever I had plus the 2 pages. And she said, "Ugh, this is just wonderful, marvelous, wonderful." I said, "No kidding, really?" And in that way, I went to her for an entire winter, every single Sunday with my 2 pages. She wasn't teaching me how to write this book, she was just teaching me how to get through it.
Esther was sort of like a rock in an otherwise calm sea. I mean, I'm mostly in a pretty calm, controlled sea that every now and then gets an upheaval, and there are waves and there's currents, and suddenly I need to cling to a rock. She would be the rock I would swim to. I was just totally frazzled once, and I could not handle everything that was being asked of me. And Esther said, come down to the loft. And she unrolled a big bolt of butcher paper and had me lie down on it. She took a huge magic marker, and she outlined my body. I got up and I looked at my outline, and she said, you have borders. I want you to remember, you have boundaries. And you can establish them. You can say no. You have boundaries. Well, Esther came through for people in ways that were just right for them at moments when they needed it.
If she had been created as Adam's equal and not been considered a temptress, Dayenu.
If Miriam had led the folk, had been hindered when she spoke, had been heeded, not been punished, Dayenu.
If our fathers had not pitted our mothers against each other, like Abraham with Sarah and Hagar, or Jacob with Leah and Rachel.
All people need their history, their mythos. Women may need it most of all.
Our revolution is to go to the sources and bring the idea of the exodus of women, the importance of women, and the importance of Miriam as our prophet.
And Miriam, the prophetess, took the timbrel in her hand and led the women down to the sea, and there they danced. And they
Esther Broner set out to create a new tradition, to tell of the prophet Miriam, sister of Moses, who watched over him. She organized the people. We women have taken an ancient account and made it our very own. Instead of the prophet Elijah, we sing of the prophet Miriam.
We can think about God in a kind of a female way, right? We can think of God as giving birth to the world. We can think of the liberation as having included women. Miriam can take her rightful place among her siblings and the people she leads.
In all the preparation of the altar, and all the honoring and inviting of the men up to the top of the mountain, there was no place for Miriam. Aaron, his sons, and 70 elders of the tribe were invited to the top of the mountain. But nobody made a robe for Miriam. No one invited her up the mount.
Miriam gets short shrift in general. We don't have very much of her story. She's an equal partner with Moses in the Torah's singing of the Song at the Sea. Many, many people now put a Miriam's cup on the table filled with water because she was the woman of water.
I want us to think about the Miriams who led us out of Mitzrayim, or the Miriams who bore us, the Miriams who took us across the water.
I want to honor some women that are the mothers of handicapped children. They're Miriams. They really are Miriams, and they were wonderful with these children. It's easy to be wonderful when you got great, beautiful children, you know. But when you got kids that nobody wants to look at, it's really hard. And they did it. So I want to put them in the middle and bless them.
We saw her role of leading the women in song and dance and the finder of water in the desert. We saw that role as so emblematic of women's creativity, and we celebrated it.
In the name of ritual, we can do anything. We can do astonishing acts.
Simcha knows the song they are singing. Her heart lightens, her voice rises in song. She does not notice the religious policewoman who's thrown a shmata, rag over her head. The dancing men stop. Who is singing, thunders the rabbi. It is forbidden for a woman's voice to be raised in song.
When her father died, she loved him so much and she wanted to honor him. She wanted to say Kaddish every day for a year, which was rare for a woman to do.
He wanted a Kaddish, a daily prayer. I have 2 brothers, but I, as the eldest, did not want to give that over to them.
To do that, she had to find an Orthodox minyan. But the Orthodox minyanim that she found wouldn't allow a woman to participate. She finally found one that allowed her to stand behind a plastic shower curtain.
The fact that she chose an Orthodox synagogue in which to recite Kaddish for her father expressed the connection that she felt to the tradition, which she never really turned her back on, even as she went far beyond it.
That machitza, that separation, became my great oppression. At first, it was on a clothes rack. Then they hung it, a sort of cheap lace curtain from golden threads.
It was so demeaning and so painful to her every day to be treated like an imposter, as she very seriously said Kaddish for her father.
Yitkadal v'yitkadash shmei rabah v'alma divrach yerotei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayachon I sent out an SOS, and I said, "Dear mates, I have such a longing to extend beyond myself, to not just be a small shadow here. Please come to me and help us have a minion of women."
Her experience of encountering the Orthodox minion every morning, that she could be reverent and irreverent. She could sort of bait some of the men, and yet she could just walk away from a confrontation, and she could be religious and sacrilegious. She had all these experiences sitting there as she remembered her father with great love.
The other great significant man in Esther's life was her husband, Bob. They were both highly respected artists who loved their craft and continued working as long as they could. Bob worked until his illness made it impossible.
Their art was what brought them so much joy and drive and passion that was really, I think, the focus of their lives.
I think to understand these drawings is to understand that my father was first and foremost an artist and loved technique. He drew what he saw. He struggled, obviously, with this diagnosis of the Parkinson's. Dad had gotten more sick, and she wanted him to know, no matter what, that with all of this, she would recommit. And maybe she needed his recommitment. And so they asked me to throw them a wedding.
And the first wedding, Esther's parents did, who were just raw kids.
While she was not only the love of his life, but the reason he lived several additional years, he talked about how he could not yet leave this world where he saw her face every day.
Even at the very end of Bob's sad, drawn-out illness, Esther was still incredibly devoted and romantic. To the very end, she was romantic about her Bobby.
What we decided to do was everything they didn't have in January 18th, 1948, all the things they couldn't afford or were rebellious about. So for this wedding, she wanted white, but a Mexican wedding dress with color. Yes, it was her idea, but again, you know, my father would be the first to tell you that he's not going to be the person that's going to say, let's go to this party, but it's always a good idea that she took him to the party. And so, indeed, she was the mover and the person of action in their relationship, and he was her rock.
Ritual takes the chaos of the world and gives it shape, order, and form.
The sacred shmata originated in the Seder group. It was tacky pink chiffon or something tied together in a long rope. All the women would hold on to it and circle everybody at the end of the Seder.
In 1984, there was a gathering of leaders of the world's major religions at the foot of Mount Sinai, where Moses had received the Ten Commandments. These leaders met in the hope of symbolically making peace between Jews and Muslims in the Middle East.
All religions, world religions, were represented, even Buddhism and Shinto and, of course, Muslim, Christian, everyone. And Lilly and Esther were representing the feminist religion.
Lilly and I brought it to the top of Sinai, and we tied people around asking Egyptians and Israelis to make peace.
And they brought the shmata with them, used it on Mount Sinai, and brought it back to the Seder group. So it became an absolutely sacred part of the ritual that we would end the Seder every year by stretching this around the whole group.
It was always just an incredible blessing and a sacred moment.
Today, hundreds of women's Seders are taking place all over the world. They may not know or remember the woman who started it all in 1976. Recognition is always a struggle for women. It took 17 years before Esther finally got her Women's Haggadah published by Harper San Francisco in 1994.
She was a true artist. She worked, she never stopped writing. Whether she was published or not, paid or not, recognized or not, she stuck to her vision and she wrote. She paid a high cost. She never had money, and she rarely had her moments of fame. So gradually, as the years went on, and she saw herself eclipsed, the Seder took its place. It was her moment of glory. Her creativity shone, and we all looked up to her so much, and it was a very notable event in the year.
She worked so hard on it. She invested so much in it. It really became the stage upon which she was able to really, be center stage.
I think she gloried in that moment, and why not? Artists have to have a certain amount of ego to do what they do and to live so precariously.
It was so important to Esther, and it became increasingly so over the years. But it became a performance piece. Not the last year. The last year was the intimate, powerful, vulnerable, profound event, I think, that touched all of us who sat at that table that night.
To create a community around Esther when she was sick and dying, that was a weave of women. And it was, if you imagine what it's like to actually weave and take one strand at a time, put them together and create something that can support a tremendous weight, that's what happened around Esther's illness. I never saw anything quite like it. There was an email list, I think 30 people were on it. We all were kept abreast of her condition. We were all told when we couldn't visit, when she was strong enough to maybe take 2 a day or 3 a day. That sort of community, which social networking and email made possible, first required a mindset. And that mindset is something that Esther created and we all reciprocated.
It was Esther's last Friday night. Her granddaughter, Alexandra, was in London on a study program.
We were all coming and going from around her hospital bed. Esther was breathing in a labored way.
The family was at her bedside, along with Gloria and myself. Nechama placed a laptop on Esther's stomach. There was Alexandra on the screen.
Suddenly, there was grandmother and granddaughter together.
My mom realized that she had forgotten to ask the shul to send a rabbi or something to do any kind of service for Shabbat. And so she called me, and I could connect with her from so far away. In times like that, really all you can do is pray. And so I sang.
בואכם לשלום, מלכי השלום, מלכי עליון. מי מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא.
I don't think of myself as a pioneer. I think of myself as trying something, and it wasn't accepted when I wrote the Haggadah. It wasn't accepted at all. I was booed at some synagogues. Yeah. So that's it. That's an interesting way to start something that'll last forever, is through disregard. And I'm in love with all these women, so that's the best thing of all.
Yit Kadel, Yit Kadesh, Shemei Baba.
Esther Broner died on June 21st, 2011.
Yamlich Malchutei, Vyatzmach Pimkanei.
I brought a stone from our trip to Mount Sinai and placed it in her grave. I was one of those souls whose life she touched. She was the mother of us all.
Amen.
I think Esther's greatest legacy is her legitimization of alternative rituals. The fact that you could borrow from tradition and utilize all the feeling and all the sacredness of it and make it relevant to women, I think has been a gift to all of us.
I mean, sometimes you have to stop and think why somebody will remember, but Esther is 100% unique.
She stepped over boundaries, but in time and because of her, those boundaries shifted, and the things that she taught us became acceptable. I think a lot of Orthodox homes have brought in ritual where they would not have, had she not begun that process. I'm not so sure whether women would know that it came from Esther Broner. That's sort of the injustice of it.
Are we revolutionizing this big Jewish world from within? I don't think so. Have we touched the lives of many people? Yes.
The Women's Seder will never be the same without my grandma, but I think she expected it to go on. That's what the Women's Seder was really about, too. She was passing on the torch to all of us, individually and collectively. And I think that is one thing I feel an obligation to carry on and to bring to my generation, and one day having my own Women's Seder.
I will go with you through the desert, and then I will be immersed with you. I will be part of you. I will be with you forever.
Amen.
Thank
you. Will be. You will be. Amen.
Well, we have concluded the Passover Seder in the new tradition, and we fly homeward to Zion on the wings of Shekhinah. Amen.
Esther exploded into my life like a star. It was exploding and there were shards of light.
We were both teaching, and Esther, of course, had that inimitable laugh in the lunchroom because she was always telling fabulous stories, and of course I gravitated to her table.
I wasn't a totally irreverent secularist.
And she always laughed. She always laughed at it, right? I would always say, oh, where's this God nonsense? And she would laugh.
An extraordinary capacity to make you feel that you were one of the most important people in her life, if not the most important at that moment.
How can we imitate Esther's laugh? It was this wild, witchy cackle. It was very, very infectious, and it was very wholehearted. I don't think I could ever imitate it. I wish I could. And she waved her hands like that, didn't she? Oh, I'm not doing her justice, but that's as close as I can come.